Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the long, smoky shadow of a Viking feast, a place of ritual toast, mysterious rules, and more sheep parts than you'll know what to do with. You push open the heavy wooden door of a longhouse, and a blast of warm air hits your face. It smells like roasted meat, mead-soaked wood, and at least 3 different kinds of fermented dairy. Torches flicker on the walls, casting golden halos on fur-cloaked shoulders and gleaming drinking horns. You might think you're just here for dinner, but no. Viking feasts are less dinner party and more carefully orchestrated social battlefield. And if you don't know the rules, you'll offend someone important, spill your meat on the wrong tunic, or, worst of all, sit in the wrong seat. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere unusual, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where the sleepiest Vikings come from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've been summoned, not invited mind you, but summoned to this feast by a local chieftain. His name is possibly Egil or Björn or something that sounds like someone sneezed while naming a rock. You're here because you've either proven yourself in battle, married someone important, or were lucky enough to be born with the right last name. Outside, the Scandinavian wind howls like a bored god, but inside, it's warm and strangely formal. Feasts are rare and significant. They celebrate victories, changing seasons, births and deaths, and sometimes all 4 at once. The food is secondary. The rules? Oh, they matter more than anything. The longhouse is huge, wooden beams blackened with years of soot. A smoke hole in the center lets out just enough air to prevent mass asphyxiation. You'd think someone might invent a chimney. They don't. Historians still argue whether the smoky air was intentional, to preserve meat, or perhaps just to haze the guests into mild delirium. You shuffle in, greeted by a very muscular man who smells like reindeer fat and suspiciously counts your fingers. It's not a superstition. He's checking for warriors who lost digits in battle. That sort of thing determines status here. You nod awkwardly, and he lets you pass. The hall is split lengthwise, like a theater. Long wooden tables stretch out from either side of a central fire trench, which crackles with flame and occasionally spits out a burning splinter at someone's shin. Everyone acts like this is normal. Your boots already smell like lamb fat. The central seats near the fire are for the highest-ranking guests, the chieftain, the honored warriors, the poet if he's not too sarcastic. Farther out, closer to the wall, where the smoke curls thickest, are the lesser ranks, and out of sight, behind you in the shadows, are the thralls, the enslaved workers who will carry, clean, and never be allowed to sip from the good horns. It's loud in here, not from drunkenness, that comes later, but from introductions. Names are shouted, boasts are shared. You quickly learn to nod approvingly at anyone who uses the phrase, "slain 5 men with 1 axe." This earns you a horn of thin ale and a friendly slap on the back that nearly dislocates your shoulder. Despite the boisterous mood, there's an undeniable sense of order. You spot an elder woman gently correcting a younger man's posture. He's holding his knife like a peasant. This is serious stuff. Even your cutlery sends a message. The chieftain, his beard braided with beads, some of which may be human teeth, rises and welcomes everyone. He speaks in Old Norse, but you catch the rhythm. It's equal parts sermon, stand-up routine, and threat. A cheer goes up. The feast has begun. As you're handed your first chunk of something vaguely roasted, you notice the decorations. Shields hung like portraits, boar tusks nailed to rafters, carved wooden gods watching from the corners with judgmental, bug-eyed stares. One of them might be Thor, or maybe just someone's great-uncle immortalized in wood. The line between divine and family is sometimes thin. You're nudged from behind. A servant, quiet, quick, slips a bowl in front of you. It's warm, beige, and smells like sadness. Boiled barley porridge, a starter course. You're meant to eat it gratefully, and so you do, spooning it slowly while nodding in time with the fire crackles. It tastes like a warm apology. Historians still debate whether Viking feasts were weekly occurrences or saved for only the most sacred events. Archaeological remains suggest they were more rare and symbolic than regular. Your presence here, then, is a big deal. You feel honored. You also feel slightly gassy, but that might be the porridge. You settle in. Around you, the clinking of horns, the rhythmic clatter of carved spoons, the muttered curses as someone realizes their seat was supposed to be 4 spots to the left. A seat that close to the fire? That's power. You remember that. In the distance, someone begins to sing a song in a low, droning voice. It's about a god who lost his shoe in a swamp and wrestled a talking otter. It's meant to calm the room. Oddly, it works. You're already dozing a little when the next course arrives. The bowl of barley has barely settled in your stomach when a hand, firm and calloused, nudges your elbow. Another dish appears, this time slightly more threatening. A slice of fish, cured in something acidic and curling at the edges like it just heard a ghost story. It smells like vinegar and ocean memories. You eat it anyway. Welcome to the next course. Now, before you get too comfortable, it's time to understand who actually gets to be here. Because Viking feasts weren't open invite affairs. If you just wandered in off the fjord, someone would have politely, well, maybe not politely, suggested you leave. Or more likely, they'd have hurled you into a snowbank and called it a teaching moment. Feasts were invitations of rank, invitations of blood, honor, or favor. If you were kin to the chieftain, you came. If you fought bravely for him, you came. If you composed a decent enough poem about his beard last summer, you might get a seat near the door. If you were a merchant with 6 good sheep and a barrel of imported wine, oh, suddenly you're a valued guest. Social mobility? It came with bribes, and then there were those who served, the thralls and lower-class farmers who weren't feasting but attending. They brought wood, poured ale, roasted goat legs, and prayed their names wouldn't be forgotten when it came time for winter grain shares. You'd think this was a grim fate, but being close to the feast, even without tasting it, meant connection. Status adjacent. It mattered. Historians still argue whether thralls ever got to sit at the table during smaller feasts. Some say yes, during festivals. Others insist even then they stayed on the fringe, watching with wooden bowls half filled with broth and envy. You look around the room. It's not just who's here, but how they're seated. To your left is a wide-shouldered man with braided hair and a gold pin in his cloak. Clearly someone important. He hasn't made eye contact yet, which is probably for the best. To your right is a smaller figure, older, maybe a skald or herbalist, chewing something that looks suspiciously like bark. They smile faintly, knowingly. You nod back. Directly across from you, a woman adjusts her place setting with meticulous care. She touches each utensil like it holds meaning. It does. In Viking culture, table tools were symbolic. Owning a fine knife or a polished drinking horn showed wealth. But more importantly, it showed permission. Only guests of a certain status could use engraved spoons or have their mead served in silver-trimmed cups. Everyone else? Wood or bone? Usually bone. Seating wasn't just about convenience. It was a physical expression of the invisible pecking order. High-ranking guests sat closest to the hearth, where the heat was steady and the best cuts of meat arrived first. The farther from the fire, the colder the food, and the less likely anyone would refill your ale horn. If you sat all the way at the end, near the goats probably, you were basically there to listen and nod, and the seating arrangements weren't left to chance. The host, often the chieftain, would consult with kin and advisors for days beforehand to ensure the balance was perfect. Sitting someone too close could spark a feud. Sitting someone too far could spark a dagger. In fact, there are saga stories where entire battles began because someone sat on the wrong bench. It sounds ridiculous, until you realize everyone here has a sword and something to prove. One such tale tells of a feast where a visiting noble was given a spot 2 seats below where he expected to be. He smiled politely, drank the mead, and later that night set the host's barn on fire. Passive-aggressive, Viking style. But it wasn't just power games. Seating reflected obligations too. If you were placed near the chieftain, it meant he trusted you to defend him in case something went wrong. Like if the mead turned out to be poisoned, or a rival decided the longhouse was the perfect spot for a brawl. If you were at the edge of the room, well, you were on your own. Hope you can wrestle with a shield in one hand and a drumstick in the other. Still, some guests enjoyed the low seats. Less attention, fewer speeches, and often more of the weirder dishes. Sure, you missed out on roast boar and honeyed mead, but you got pickled fish eyes and something called blood porridge, which, let's be honest, you weren't going to forget. A serving girl brushes past your shoulder, whispering something to the man beside you. He stands stiffly and swaps seats with a newcomer. No fuss, no question. Everyone notices. Everyone pretends not to. Someone's status just changed. Maybe promoted, maybe demoted. You sip your mead slowly and stay very, very still. And let's talk about mead for a second. It's flowing steadily now, golden and thick, made from honey and herbs and occasionally berries or birch sap. You're not drinking freely, though. Not yet. That comes later. For now, it's measured. Every horn is passed ceremonially, each sip timed with the rhythm of the evening. Drinking too fast or too soon. Rude. Worse. Suspicious. The host stands again. He thanks the gods for the harvest, the livestock, and probably for not having been stabbed yet. His wife, regal and watchful, raises her own horn in silent agreement. Everyone follows. A toast, not the first and definitely not the last. Then comes a pause. No music, no clinking, just the quiet hum of fire and breathing. The moment is almost spiritual, until someone belches loudly enough to startle the dog curled by the door. Laughter returns like a wave. A good belch in Viking etiquette isn't offensive, it's a compliment. You're full, you're pleased, and most importantly, you're alive. You lean back slightly, feeling the heat of the fire kiss your boots and the weight of centuries pressing down around you. You're part of something ancient now, a ritual, a hierarchy, a puzzle of personalities arranged by a bearded man with far too many rings. You didn't earn your place at this table, but for now, you belong. You're just beginning to enjoy your precarious sense of belonging when the man across from you shifts. Not dramatically, but just enough to make his cloak slide open, revealing a sheathed dagger. It's decorative, clearly expensive, silver hilt, serpent engraving, but definitely functional. You glance around and notice something both fascinating and deeply unsettling. Everyone is armed. Swords hang from belts like dinner napkins. Axes rest politely against benches. Daggers are laid out beside soup spoons as if they were dessert forks. There's no coat check for weapons here. No polite, please leave your broadsword at the door. This is a Viking feast, and if you come unarmed, you may as well have arrived naked. This isn't paranoia. It's protocol. Feasting fully armed wasn't just tolerated, it was expected. Historians believe this tradition served several purposes, none of which made guests feel particularly at ease. First, it was a symbol of honor. A weapon was part of your identity, your reputation, your CV and sharpened steel. Leaving it behind would be like refusing to shake hands. Second, it was a reminder. Everyone here had the potential to kill you, and yet chose not to. Isn't that comforting? The etiquette, of course, was extremely specific. You couldn't just bring any weapon. No two-handed battle axes across the lap. No spears leaning awkwardly into the soup. Short swords, sea axes, and daggers were preferred, small enough to handle delicately, but menacing enough to deter insults. You were also expected to handle your weapons with grace. Touching the hilt too often? Aggressive? Leaving your blade on the floor? Disrespectful? Drawing it mid-toast? That better be part of a song. Viking sagas tell of more than one feast ending in chaos because someone absent-mindedly adjusted their scabbard during a skald's poem. One wrong twitch, and suddenly everyone's flipping tables. There's even a debated story, still hotly argued among historians, about a guest who attempted to balance his drinking horn on his sword for laughs. It spilled mead onto the chieftain's lap. He didn't laugh. The guest was later found outside, half buried in snow, allegedly sleeping it off. The chieftain's table, of course, had its own rules. No weapons were to be drawn within 3 paces of the high seat unless explicitly permitted. Some feasts even had guards posted to enforce this boundary. Their role was ceremonial, until it wasn't. A rustle to your left. A man with arms the size of small barrels leans forward to make a joke. As he moves, his axe clinks against the table. Everyone hears it. For a moment, the laughter softens, just slightly. He chuckles louder, shows his empty hands, and slowly leans back. The moment passes, but you feel it in the room, a tiny recalibration of trust. Interestingly, women, especially high-ranking ones, also carried blades. Not always for combat, but for ritual. Small knives used to carve meat, slice bread, or mark ceremonial lines in the tablecloth. Yes, that was a thing. These tools, too, held status. A silver-edged blade meant you were respected. A rusted iron one? You were probably here because your husband was. This all gives the feast a strange duality. It's festive, yes, but humming with tension. Every toast is an oath, every song could be a challenge, and every casual lean toward your belt might be interpreted as a dual invitation. You shift your own eating knife, a plain iron one, borrowed, and hope no one notices your thumb trembles when you adjust it. There's a kind of polite choreography to the way guests manage their weapons while eating. Swords rest carefully across laps. Daggers are held in non-dominant hands while drinking. Axes, usually leaned against the table leg, blades facing inward toward the self as a gesture of peace. If you face the blade outward, well, either you didn't know the rules or you wanted trouble. Sometimes rival clans were seated at opposite ends of the room on purpose, not to keep them safe, but to encourage a subtle contest. Who could eat more meat, toast with more enthusiasm, outlast the other in alcohol tolerance? These feasts were more than just meals. They were performances, political theater, testosterone in stew form. And of course, not every weapon was literal. Words could cut deeper than blades, and you've already heard more than one boastful comment that feels barbed. A scold nearby has just compared another guest's beard to a goat that drowned in whey. Laughter follows, but the man in question does not laugh. His hand hovers near his dagger for a second too long. The chieftain sees it. He raises his horn again, loud and quick. Another toast, another distraction. The skald sits back, smug. The goat-beard man drinks deeply, pretending to let it go. You make a mental note. Never insult another man's facial hair. Noted. The younger guests seem more casual, but even they follow the rules. You spot one lad who's polished the handle of his knife to a mirror finish. He's using it to check his braids. Another girl, perhaps the daughter of a minor noble, has her blade tucked neatly into a sheath carved with runes. Not decoration, protection, a signal that she's to be taken seriously. Historians still debate how often these armed feasts erupted into actual violence. Some say rarely, maybe once in a generation. Others claim the sagas romanticized them, and that real feasts were minefields of grudges where one spilled drink could lead to a vendetta that lasted winters. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. You wonder about that as your next course arrives. Cured lamb, sliced thin and arranged like flower petals. It's served with a small cup of thick yogurt, sour and smoky. You take a bite, careful not to clink your knife too loudly on the plate. A storyteller begins another saga in the corner. It's about a woman who tricked a frost giant into giving her a magical cloak by offering him mead in a compliment. The room softens again, the fire crackles, and you sit there, blade across your lap, horn in hand, listening carefully. You've survived the first few rounds. No one's challenged you. No one's corrected your grip. Still, you keep one eye on your neighbors, just in case. You might assume, by now, that things would be loosening up. The food's been flowing, the toasts have begun, and there's even a man softly playing a lyre, made from what suspiciously looks like horsehair and a turtle shell. But no, this is when things get weirdly more structured. Because the Viking relationship with alcohol wasn't just drink until you forget your own saga. It was measured, controlled, practically sacred. That horn in your hand? It's not yours. Not really. It belongs to the house. It's part of the ritual. And it will be passed around carefully, filled and refilled by someone who takes their job just as seriously as a priest might take communion. Mead wasn't just a beverage. It was a bridge between realms, between guests, between your dignity and the floor. And yes, you're drinking mead, not beer, not wine, though those existed too. But tonight it's honey-based, golden, and just sweet enough to lull you into a false sense of control. Viking mead recipes varied by region and season. Some included berries, others birch sap. One even featured crushed herbs designed to keep warriors sharp in mind and loose in tongue. Sounds like a risky combination. The server approaches again, tall, silent, eyes sharp. She carries a pitcher with carved animal heads on either side, and with great ceremony she pours a slow ribbon of mead into your horn. You nod with what you hope is respectful solemnity, and she moves on. No tipping, no chit-chat. This is not a tavern, this is a rite. And here's where it gets serious. You do not drink at will. Every horn has a rhythm. The The toasts are timed. You drink when the host drinks, or when the speaker gestures, or when the guest of honor finishes his speech, which might be long, slurred, and mostly about a dream he had involving a talking bear and a cheese wheel. Doesn't matter, you wait. Drinking out of sync is a social faux pas so grave it might land you in a poem, a bad poem. Some feasts even had designated mead watchers, elders or stewards whose job was to ensure no one got ahead of the flow. They'd walk around like sleepy-eyed referees, subtly repositioning a horn here or offering a small nod there. Too drunk, too fast, they'd pull you aside for a walk, which was either a sobering stroll or a polite exile, depending on how many times you'd spilled your drink on the dog. And the host? He's like the mead conductor. He gives signals. He pauses between courses, makes little toasts about his ancestors or the weather, or how his new barn has fewer leaks than last year. You raise your horn when he does. You drink when he drinks. You pretend to laugh when he makes a joke about the sheep with the limp. It's polite. Now, the horns themselves, there's a whole hierarchy. The most honored guests drink from elaborately carved horns, ivory-tipped, banded with bronze or silver, often engraved with mythic beasts. Yours is more modest, bone, maybe, with a small crack near the tip. Still better than the wooden cups given to the outer guests. Better than nothing. You raise your horn and sip. It's sweet, earthy, slightly fizzy. You taste honey and smoke and something that might be juniper or might be moss. Honestly, it's hard to say. The warmth hits your chest immediately, and for a moment you feel light, almost airborne. You're not drunk, not yet, but your shoulders relax. The fire seems warmer. The people seem blurrier. You smile at the man across from you, goat beard, and this time he smiles back. Maybe you're not enemies after all. Still, moderation is key. Drinking too much too early is an amateur mistake. A Viking feast lasted hours, sometimes days. This wasn't a sprint. It was a long, meandering saga of consumption, ritual, and awkward poetry. Pacing was everything. Historians still argue whether Vikings always used mead or if it was reserved for special occasions. Some suggest that beer, thin, mildly alcoholic, and often warm, was the daily go-to, with mead reserved for guests and gods. Others believe the mead flowed freely, but only in precise ritual contexts. Either way, it wasn't just there to get you buzzed, it was there to unify the room. Which brings us to the mead circle. At some point during every proper Viking feast, a round of communal drinking takes place. The horn is passed, not randomly, but in a deliberate sequence, usually clockwise, sometimes by age or rank. Each person must take a sip and say something, a memory, a vow, a joke, a blessing, something meaningful, or at least loud. It's your turn. The horn arrives, warm from the last hand, slick with condensation. You take it, hesitate, then raise it with a smile that you hope conveys friendly and mysterious, rather than nervous and unprepared. You say something simple, to warm fire and cold air. A few nods, a small cheer, it's enough. You sip, then pass the horn. Your heart is pounding, your hands are steady. Success. Of course, not every toast is so peaceful. Later in the evening, as mead takes its toll and egos swell like bread in an oven, things escalate. Boasts are made, challenges are issued, oaths are sworn that will absolutely be regretted in the morning. You'll hear a man promise to build a boat big enough to sail to the moon. Another vows to marry the chieftain's horse. It's unclear whether this is symbolic. There's even a special name for the most dangerous kind of toast, the braggerful. This is no casual cheers. It's a serious, honor-bound vow made over the horn, usually involving battle, revenge, or some ill-advised romantic quest. And once it's said aloud, it must be completed, or else your reputation is toast. The braggerful could make you a legend or a joke. You're quietly grateful no one has forced you into one yet. Still, you sip carefully. The fire burns low now, casting long shadows. The rhythm of the room slows. Horns are passed with more gentleness. The dog sighs and curls closer to the hearth. And across the table, a woman begins to hum. A lullaby. Old, wordless, barely audible. You exhale. Your cheeks are warm. The mead was measured, but it's doing its work. The warmth of the mead still lingers in your throat when the next course arrives. Boiled sheep's head. Not a piece of it, not shaved or diced, but the entire head, staring upward like it too is wondering how it ended up here. It's been split down the middle for easier sharing, though this does little to soften the experience. One half is placed in front of the chieftain, the other, astonishingly, in front of you. You do your best to appear unfazed. This is not the time for modern sensitivities. You are expected to eat, politely, gratefully, and with a nod to the gods, or at least to the cook. The cheek meat is tender, the eye socket surprisingly flavorful if you know what you're doing, which you don't. Someone offers you a carved spoon, and you quietly focus on the less intimidating parts. A bit of boiled tongue, perhaps, something without eyelashes. Meals at Viking feasts followed a course-by-course tradition, not because they were fancy, but because everything had symbolic importance. You weren't just being fed, you were participating in a reenactment of order, tradition, and legacy. Food arrived in stages, each one presented with a deliberate slowness that allowed everyone to digest more than just the meat. You were also digesting meaning. First the barley, then the fish, then the lamb, now the head. Next might be seal stew if you're lucky, or unlucky. Some regions also served fermented shark, hakarl, a dish so aggressively pungent that modern tasters describe it as chewing on an old boot soaked in ammonia. For Vikings, it was a delicacy, or a dare. Historians still debate whether it was truly enjoyed or just endured to prove toughness. Drinks accompanied each course. You're offered sour whey with this one, a cloudy, mouth-puckering liquid that tastes like yogurt's distant bitter cousin. It cuts through the richness of the meat, and also through your hope that dessert might be something nice. As you eat, conversations rise and fall in gentle waves, and nothing is rushed. No one gobbles food or asks when the next course is coming. Time is melted into a kind of ceremonial patience. The feast is a slow burn, a story with many chapters, and like all good stories, it builds. The central fire is being stoked again. A servant ladles a broth into wide wooden bowls, some with cabbage, some with bone marrow, all with a layer of fat that reflects the firelight like an oil painting. One of the older guests scoops it up and blows softly on his spoon, his beard damp with steam. No one speaks. This is a moment for reverence. Food isn't just fuel, it's a memory. Every bite connects you to ancestors, to gods, to old winters survived on nothing but dried fish and frostbitten oats. Even your barley porridge from earlier now seems imbued with weight. Or maybe that's just the mead talking. You're handed a small plate with a sliver of dried horse meat. It's chewy, salty, and oddly satisfying. You chew in time with the others, not daring to finish before the chieftain does. He eats slowly. He's savoring each bite with theatrical purpose. You match his pace like a nervous student at a dance recital. Then comes a bowl of berries, not fresh, this is winter, but preserved in honey. Dark, sweet, with the faint tang of fermentation. Dessert? Possibly, or just a palate cleanser before the next meat. No one clarifies. A loud thunk breaks the murmuring rhythm. A server has placed a roast boar's leg on the central table. It's glistening, surrounded by onions, thick black bread, and something green that might be lichen or maybe just old parsley. The crowd stirs. This is the unofficial centerpiece of the night. Carving it is a mark of honor and danger. The chieftain picks up the carving knife, a long blade worn smooth from years of ceremonial use. He makes the first cut, a thick, even slice from just above the hoof, and hands it to the guest seated at his right. That guest accepts the piece with both hands, nods solemnly, and immediately hands it off to a younger man sitting beside him. A gesture of respect, a recognition of mentorship. These silent exchanges mean everything. A misplaced handoff, a refusal to share. That's the kind of faux pas that ends in a family blood feud, or at least a long winter of passive-aggressive silence. You're passed a slice. It's rich, smoky, and almost tender enough to forget that you're not entirely sure what's happening. You eat it slowly, letting it linger on your tongue. This is the good stuff. You've made it to the main course without offending anyone, vomiting, or getting challenged to a duel. You're doing just fine. And still, there are rules. You're not supposed to ask for seconds. That's presumptuous. You wait for the offer. You don't slouch. That suggests disrespect. You don't clink your knife against your bowl unless you want to call attention to yourself, which, unless you're about to recite a poem, you definitely don't. Vikings prize composure during meals. Passion was for later. For now, you eat like you belong, even if every bite of seal meat is a personal journey of confusion and commitment. Somewhere, a young skald is already composing a verse about tonight's meal. You hear the murmur of early lines, something about the night of full belly and blazing hearth. You're not sure if you'll make it into the saga, but if you do, you hope it's because of your grace with the sheep's head and not the way you grimace during the way. Historians still argue over how standardized these feasts were. Some think there were regional variations so extreme that a Dane might be horrified at an Icelandic course order. Others suggest that oral tradition preserved a surprisingly stable format across generations. What's clear, though, is that the order mattered. One course led to the next. Like runes on a stone, they told a story. You glance around, the faces are redder now, not from anger, but from firelight and drink. Bellies are full. The air is thicker with steam and smoke and the strange, sour scent of overcooked cabbage. You feel it too, heavy, content, lulled. You lean back slightly, careful not to bump the guest behind you. You listen to the scrape of spoons, the soft chewing, the quiet murmur of ancient traditions still alive in fire and meat. And from somewhere outside, faint and distant, you hear the howl of wind again, cold, indifferent, but in here, the heat holds steady. You belong, for now. The feast continues, and just when you think you've entered a sleepy food coma, mead humming gently in your veins, belly warm, eyelids heavy, it begins. The toasts, or rather, the serious toasts. You've raised your horn before, yes, but those were just warm-ups, ceremonial sips, pleasant well-wishes like to the harvest, or to Egel's new roof, which hopefully won't collapse this winter. But now, the bragerfool begins, and this is where things get emotionally dangerous. A bragerfool isn't just a toast, it's a public declaration of intent, made while holding the horn and witnessed by everyone important in the room. It is part performance, part contract, and 100% pressure. You don't take a sip and say something forgettable like, "to good times." No, you stand, you hold the horn like it's a holy relic, and you promise something epic. Something like, "I will slay the bear that guards the eastern fjord," or "I will sail to the land beyond the fog and return with a dragon's tooth," or, for the slightly less ambitious, "I will build a hall bigger than this one before next winter, or I will never touch meat again." That last one gets gasps. Never touch meat again? Madness. You don't volunteer to make a bragerful. You are chosen. The host points to someone, or sometimes the horn is passed to you with meaningful eye contact, and when it lands in your lap, you must speak. Now, remember the man with the goat-like beard? He's standing now. His horn glistens. He clears his throat. "I swear," he begins, voice low and serious, "to challenge the Jarl of Falfjordur to single combat for the right to pasture his sheep on my land. I will not return until it is done." There are nods, a couple raised brows. That's a bold vow, probably personal, definitely political, and just dangerous enough to be taken seriously. He drinks deeply, wipes his beard, sits down. And now, the horn moves again. You feel the heat in your cheeks. Surely not you. You're a guest, an observer. You barely handled the whey soup without causing a scene. But the horn skips you, mercifully, and lands in the hands of a young woman across the fire. She raises it without hesitation. "To my sister," she says, "who promised to marry no man until he bested her in a riddle. I will find that man, or become one." The room loves it. Laughter, applause. One older guest leans over and whispers something approvingly in her ear. You smile, relieved to still be seated and anonymous. Bragerful were often tied to seasonal changes or upcoming voyages. Scholars believe they served multiple functions, motivating action, cementing loyalty, entertaining the crowd. Some even argue that these oaths were legal instruments, binding in a way that no paperwork could replicate. Others believe they were mostly symbolic, a way to puff up honor and gain a little attention before disappearing into the mead. What's certain is this: once you make a bragerful, people will remember, and if you fail to keep it, they'll remember that too. And so, in between courses and hornfuls, more vows are made. I will finally repair my cousin's boat. I will catch a salmon longer than my arm. I will compose a saga with no tragic endings. One man swears to grow a beard longer than any other in his village. Another swears to shave his off if he ever loses a wrestling match. This is met with shocked silence. His beard is practically its own person. The stories get grander, more surreal. A toast is made to a goat who saved a child from drowning, another to a dog who allegedly speaks in dreams. You're not sure whether to laugh or cry, so you just take another polite sip of mead and stare at the fire. Sometimes these oaths become challenges. A guest makes a vow that clearly undermines someone else's. This leads to a soft shuffle of benches, a tense silence, and a very polite "we'll settle that later," followed by a round of forced laughter. No one wants blood, yet. There's also a specific toast reserved for the ancestors. This is when the mood shifts. The horns are lowered slightly. Heads bow. The chieftain stands and invokes the names of those who feasted here before, who fought, loved, and fell long before any of tonight's guests were born. A hush falls. The only sound is the crackling fire and the faint whistle of wind pressing against the longhouse. To the fathers who built the walls, to the mothers who stirred the broth, to the dead who still remember, the horns rise again and everyone drinks. You do too. And it tastes different now, heavier, like time itself has thickened the mead. These ancestral toasts were often more than just sentimental. They reaffirmed your place in the long chain of memory. They reminded everyone, you are not the first to sit here, and if you're careful, respectful, you won't be the last. Historians point out that these rituals reinforce communal bonds. The Bragar Fool was a spotlight for the self, but also a thread in the larger fabric. Vows weren't just personal ambition. They were public declarations of what you owed to your kin, your clan, your gods. By the end of the toast cycle, you're buzzing, not from alcohol alone, but from the weight of ceremony. You've just witnessed a dozen tiny stories, half promise, half prayer, unfold in flickering firelight. Some of them will be forgotten, others will spark journeys that echo through songs, and somewhere in that heavy, mead-thick atmosphere, you start to feel dreamy. Not tired exactly, just soft around the edges, like you too could promise to climb a mountain, or build a ship, or write a poem that never ends. You won't, of course. You'll probably just finish your sheep meat and try not to trip over a dog on your way out. But for now, the night is young, the horns are full, the stories are unfolding, and you are here, quiet, watching, safe at the edge of the saga. The air in the longhouse shifts again, but not because of food or drink this time. Now it's the skald's turn. You've seen him before, an older man wrapped in a cloak patterned with stitched runes, his voice already half warmed by earlier jokes and quiet commentary. But now he stands slowly, deliberately, as if the earth beneath him must first give permission. He holds no weapon, no horn, just a carved wooden staff that might once have been a walking stick, or maybe a tree branch struck by lightning. You can't be sure, and it's better that way. The skald is the memory of the room. In Viking society, skalds were poets, historians, satirists, and entertainers, all wrapped into one slightly mysterious package. Their job wasn't simply to amuse, it was to preserve legacy, to stitch names into stories that would last longer than iron or bone. In a world without paper libraries or TikTok algorithms, they were the search engine and the editor, the myth maker and the comedian. And tonight, you are about to hear one at full power. He begins not with a greeting, but with a sound, a low hum, part melody, part wind. His voice seems to rise up from the smoke in the rafters. The conversation in the longhouse dwindles to silence, not because someone demands it, but because when a skald speaks, you listen, or you become the butt of the next verse. The story he tells begins in mist. It's the tale of a long-forgotten chieftain who challenged a sea witch to a drinking contest. He lost, but instead of death, he was cursed with eternal hiccups. This might sound absurd, and it is, but it's also strangely poetic. The skald mimics hiccups with such rhythmic grace that the crowd is already in stitches by the third stanza. He pauses only to let the laughter build, then pivots into a tale of lost love between a warrior and a raven. Yes, a literal raven. They meet on a battlefield. The raven teaches him riddles. He gives her shin bones from his enemies. Historians still debate whether this saga is symbolic or just an inside joke from the 10th century, and the skald sings parts of it, not like an opera, not like a bard at court, but with the cadence of someone who has told this tale many times, enough for it to wrap around your ears like a woolen cloak. His voice isn't perfect, it cracks, it dips into gravel, but it carries something better than pitch: memory. You begin to notice how every story includes someone present in the room, not by name, at least not directly, but with clever nods. The man who tried to climb a pine tree to impress his sweetheart? That gets a laugh from a guest near the door who's suddenly very focused on his soup. The warrior who mistook a seal for a sea demon and tried to marry it? You catch the chieftain's son shaking his head, cheeks flushed. There's an art to this: honoring, teasing, warning, all within a safe cocoon of rhyme and rhythm. The skald is never cruel. He's not roasting people. He's reminding them of their humanity. He shifts again. Now comes the heroic saga, longer, slower, like a ship moving through fog. It tells of a king who gave away his throne because his dreams told him to become a fisherman. His net, it said, could catch ideas. He brought up philosophy with his herring. It's clearly fiction, but it's so soothing you don't even care. Your eyelids droop, not from boredom, but from the sheer drowsiness of the tale's pace. The fire crackles gently. A dog sighs in its sleep. Mead cups are being quietly refilled. Somewhere in the distance, snow taps against the roof beams like it, too, wants to hear how the story ends. And that's the secret of the skald. He doesn't just tell stories. He weaves a rhythm into the room. His words are the tide. The feast is the boat. And everyone, from the goat-beard man to the teenage girl clutching a leather-bound knife, is carried along without struggle. Historians still argue how much of what Skald said was memorized versus improvised. Some say the verses were passed down word for word across generations. Others believe skalds were like jazz musicians, riffing off known themes, reworking old tales to fit new occasions. The truth, like the best tales, is probably a bit of both. But no matter how it's crafted, a good skald story is sticky. It lingers. You'll remember it tomorrow, half drunk and hungover. You'll try to retell it and forget half the clever turns. But you'll remember how it made you feel. Like the world was wide and ancient and very, very funny. The skald ends his set with a quiet line. And still she sings the raven in his dreams. He bows, not deep, not flashy, and returns to his seat. There is no applause, just a warm wave of murmurs and a few lifted horns. The dog, still asleep, kicks its hind leg like it's chasing a dream. Someone coughs. Another round of stew is served. And you feel anchored, like you've just been told a bedtime story inside a story. Like your bones remember a song you never learned. Now that the skald has settled back into the shadows, you'd think things might wind down. But no, the feast is far from over. This is the point in the evening where something unusual happens. A subtle ripple moves through the hall. Guests begin shifting on their benches, making space. There's a low, anticipatory buzz, the kind that comes right before something unpredictable. A bear wrestling match, or a game involving antlers and embarrassment. And then, from the far end of the room, they arrive. The jesters, mockers, and gamesmen, a rotating cast of informal entertainers who aren't necessarily funny, or athletic, or even particularly liked, but tonight they serve a sacred purpose: to break the tension, to unstick the mood, to make people laugh at something other than their own complicated feelings about dead ancestors and fermented shark. The first one is a wiry man in a tunic far too colorful for Viking standards. He's wearing a headband made of dried moss. You don't know why. No one does. That's kind of the point. He bows dramatically and begins a monologue about the rules of the indoor Viking games. And oh yes, there are games. Not for children, but for adults who've consumed a dangerous combination of sheep's head, sour whey, and poetic longing. Tonight's game is called Snorri's Spoon. The rules are never quite clear, even as he explains them. Something about balancing a spoon on your nose, then insulting your opponent in verse while hopping on one leg. You're not sure if it's traditional or completely made up on the spot. Doesn't matter. The chieftain chuckles. That's enough to make it official. 2 volunteers stumble forward. One is barefoot. The other is already laughing too hard to stand. They begin the challenge, balancing, hopping, rhyming. It's chaotic, silly, and absolutely riveting. This is important. Viking feasts weren't just for bonding through meat and mead. They were also pressure valves. All that formality, all that honor, it needed a release. A moment of sanctioned absurdity. Enter the mockery rites. Some of the oldest sagas refer to these as flighting, A verbal sparring match where insults are flung like arrows, but with rhythm, style, and ideally good humor. Think Viking rap battles, but with more references to goat dung and slightly less swagger. Now, a new pair steps up, a woman with sharp eyes and a man whose beard has clearly been the subject of ridicule before. She goes first. "Your nose," she says sweetly, "is long enough to paddle a boat, yet not wise enough to smell when it leaks." The crowd loses it. His retort is slower, clunkier. "At least my face isn't feared by mirrors." He gets a few sympathy groans. Clearly, she's the favorite. This isn't mean-spirited, it's ritualized banter like wrestling with words. It lets people release tension without drawing weapons, and like everything tonight, it has rules. You don't insult blood relatives, you don't repeat old jokes, and if you lose, you toast your opponent with grace. Sometimes even giving them a token, like your spoon, or your dignity. You notice some guests just watching, eyes soft with mead and sleep. Others clap along with the rhythm, shouting encouragement. Even the dogs perk up, sensing the rise in energy. Historians debate the origins of these games. Some think they evolved from older Norse court traditions, where kings would be entertained by jesters who mocked them with impunity, if they were clever enough to survive it. Others believe it began with sibling rivalry in the long winters and eventually made its way into public feasts. The truth is likely both. Humor is ancient, and humans have always needed a moment to laugh at themselves. After several rounds, the game's slow. No one announces a winner. That's not the point. It's the laughter, the red faces, the new inside jokes now embedded in memory. You hear a particularly good one nearby. "How do you find a Viking in the fog?" "How?" "You don't. He finds you, and he's already eaten your goat." Everyone laughs. Someone falls off a bench. A bowl of boiled cabbage skids across the floor, narrowly missing a dog. No one's upset. This is the acceptable window of chaos. Tomorrow, order returns. But for now, this is safe rebellion. You even consider stepping forward to try a verse. You've been quietly composing one in your head, something about a man whose beard hides birds. But you think better of it. Maybe next time. There's a pause now. The room exhales, cups are refilled. Someone burps, politely muffled in a fur sleeve. A few guests yawn. One man leans so far back he nearly tips his bench. And through it all, the embers crackle softly. The mead hums gently in your veins. The games are over, but the mood has lightened. The longhouse feels warmer, safer, more human. No one keeps score. No one remembers every joke. But they remember the laughter, and that's enough. The laughter has mellowed now, slipping into a kind of post-giggle hum that ripples gently around the room. People lean back, stretch their legs, refill their horns a little more lazily. Even the children, yes, there are a few quietly tucked into fur-lined corners, are yawning like tiny bears in spring. But the feast doesn't stop, because just as the games have faded, another presence rises. This time quiet, reverent, and dressed in woven wool dyed a deep ironweed purple, the seer. She isn't flashy. She doesn't stand or announce herself. She simply appears, walking softly across the packed floor, her steps as soundless as snow falling on stone. In Viking society, the vulva or seeress was a figure of immense respect and just a tiny bit of fear. She saw things you didn't, possibly things you didn't want her to. And yet, here she is, slipping into the firelight like she was invited by the wind. A respectful hush falls. The mood shifts again, gently but definitely. This isn't storytelling. This is something older, something weirder. She doesn't speak at first, just kneels by the fire, tracing circles in the ash with a carved stick that might be birch or bone. No one interrupts, not even the dogs. You realize, slowly, that this is part of the feast, too. Not every night, not even most nights. But when a seer appears, you make room. You listen. She hums low, a kind of tuneless drone that wraps around the rafters like fog. Then, finally, she speaks. The wind turns south and the sea opens its eye. One of you has forgotten something important. No one responds. You're not supposed to. These aren't questions. They're riddles wrapped in prophecy, tied up with weather and time. Seers don't tell fortunes. They unravel moments. She turns to the chieftain. Her fingers move in the air like she's weaving invisible thread. Your third son dreams of ice, but his path is fire. He must not follow the seals. The chieftain nods slowly. You have no idea what it means, but he does. That's enough. Then she looks across the room, right at you. You came from far away, she says. You freeze. Everyone glances over. You carry something old, a silence. It wishes to speak. Well, that's cryptic. You manage a nod, respectful, if a little unsure, and she moves on, her attention already drifting toward the woman with the riddle marriage toast earlier. The seer murmurs something about iron under moonlight, and then turns back to the fire. That's it. Her message delivered, she simply sits. Someone offers her a bowl of broth. She accepts without a word. You let out a breath you didn't realize you were holding. Seers were often misunderstood, both then and now. Some historians see them as proto-shamans, combining herbal knowledge, intuition, and psychological insight. Others believe they were full mystics, channeling something larger. Most agree they held immense symbolic power, especially in settings like this, where stories and oaths flowed freely, but questions lingered under the surface. Having a seer at a feast wasn't just for drama. It reminded everyone, there's more to the world than meat and mead. There are dreams, omens, currents you can't see. And in the moment after she speaks, the fire crackles differently, as if the flames themselves are thinking. The longhouse settles again. A low murmur resumes, this time quieter, more inward. People sip thoughtfully. You hear snatches of conversation about dreams, ships, winter stars. Even the chieftain's son sits straighter. The third one, the one with the supposed fire path, drinks more slowly now, staring into his bowl as if it might explain his destiny. The seer doesn't speak again. She just eats, hums, and eventually curls up beside a pillar, eyes half closed like a cat in the dark. Across the hall, someone strikes a soft note on the lyre. Not a song exactly, just a lingering chord, repeated like a heartbeat at rest. The sound blends into the warmth of the room, wrapping around your shoulders like a second cloak, and you realize this is the rhythm of a Viking feast. It isn't just food and story and song, it's a deliberate weaving of moods. Like the sea, it moves in tides. High energy with the games, deep silence with the seer, laughter again soon, maybe, or a round of riddles. No one controls it, not even the chieftain. The longhouse breathes on its own. Historians have noted how the inclusion of prophecy and spiritual ritual made these feasts different from their more chaotic, less structured counterparts elsewhere in medieval Europe. Viking gatherings weren't lawless, they were layered, a little sacred, a little silly, and always aware of the invisible threads connecting the living to the dead, the past to the yet to come. You glance once more at the seer. She's watching the fire again, not asleep, just listening, as if the flames might whisper something new, just for her. And now, so are you. You've lost track of how long the feast has been going, not because of the mead, though, let's be honest, that hasn't helped, but because time in the longhouse feels like a puddle slowly expanding in every direction. There's no clock, no urgency, just the comforting swirl of firelight, food, and an ever-shifting blend of noise and silence. And now, just when you think it might be time to curl up beside the hearth and drift into dreams, someone calls out, "Time for riddles." A few groans, more chuckles, and then a low rustle as the room reorients itself. Mugs are refilled, guests sit up straighter. This part is tradition, and no Viking feast is complete without a round or three of riddles. But let's be clear, these aren't the knock-knock jokes of medieval Scandinavia. No one's asking about chickens crossing roads. These are ancient, metaphor-drenched brain puzzles, the kind that sound suspiciously like nonsense until you've had enough the mead to believe you're clever. One of the older men, bearded and draped in a reindeer hide cloak, claps twice. "I begin," he declares, and the room quiets just enough for his gravelly voice to cut through. "I am born from flame, but I swallow the cold. You feed me with breath, yet I die when I'm bold. What am I?" The longhouse hums, some whisper. One girl bites her knuckle, thinking hard. A few guests shout guesses. Fire! A forge! A drunk uncle! But the speaker only smirks. Finally, the chieftain's wife calls out, "A candle." The old man grins and lifts his cup. "Correct?" You exhale slowly. That was a warm-up. Vikings loved riddles. Known as gatur in Old Norse, they were part entertainment, part intellectual exercise, and part low-stakes social competition. You could earn honor for cleverness, but more importantly, you earned respect. These weren't just party games, they were mental duels. The next riddle comes from a woman with silver-threaded hair and an unsettlingly direct stare. I have no mouth, yet I sing. I never sleep, but I whisper in dreams. I carry boats, but no arms. What am I? You blink. The answer hits you like the edge of a cool wave. The sea, someone murmurs. A teenage boy, quiet and tentative. She nods once, a tiny smile. Well done. The room rewards him with a chorus of taps. Fingers on mugs, wooden spoons on knees. The Viking equivalent of polite applause. Some riddles are more risque. A stocky man with cheeks flushed from drink lurches to his feet. Here's one, he slurs with gleeful menace. What stands up hard in the morning, softens by night, and is most useful when wet? The room explodes with laughter. You expect someone to tell him off, but this is part of the ritual too. Viking riddles didn't shy away from double meanings. They thrived on them. An oar, shouts a woman near the fire, winking. He howls with delight. You see, her mind's dirtier than mine. You laugh despite yourself. The room has fully loosened. Even the seer, still curled by the pillar, lets out a soft exhale that might be a laugh or just a spell leaving her lungs. As the riddles continue, you start to hear recurring themes. Nature, tools, emotions disguised as objects. A cloak becomes time. A rock becomes memory. A fish becomes fear. One man shares a riddle clearly designed to stump everyone. I was never born, but always dying. I walk with no legs and speak with no tongue. If you follow me, you arrive before you begin. What am I? Silence, for a long while. Someone offers the wind, another guesses a shadow, all wrong. Then a soft voice from near the back. A dream. The riddle giver raises his cup, impressed. That's it. There's no prize, no scoreboard, just a growing sense of connection. You begin to notice the way these riddles build off each other, almost like a game of shared consciousness. One speaks, another responds, and together they uncover something deeper, something sleepy. Historians still argue about the original purpose of these riddles. Some believe they were used to train young warriors in strategy and symbolism. Others think they served a more spiritual role, teasing out insights about death, fate, and the gods. Either way, they were essential to Viking social life. And here, in the warm middle of the longhouse, their power is clear. They engage the mind just enough to keep it tethered, but not enough to jolt it fully awake. It's the perfect balance, like chewing something you've already swallowed. Your turn comes unexpectedly. Someone turns to you, a grin tugging at their lips. Guest, they say, do you have a riddle? All eyes turn, not hostile, just curious. You freeze, then scramble mentally, and somehow, maybe from the stories earlier, maybe from the seer's whisper, you find one. I am held, but never touched. I change, but I am not alive. I speak, but only when you forget me. What am I? The room stills, a few confused mutters. Someone frowns. Then, from near the skald's bench, a quiet answer. Memory. You nod, and suddenly, you're not just a guest anymore. You're part of the game, the feast, the long weaving of sleep and story and softly flickering wisdom. And as the last few riddles are shared, some silly, some surreal, you find yourself leaning into the lull. Each puzzle, each whisper, a lullaby in disguise. The riddles have faded like ripples in still water, leaving a gentle hush in their wake. It's that sleepy pause in the feast where no one moves too quickly, and every sound, the slosh of a drink, the scrape of a wooden bowl, the crack of a log in the fire, feels a little exaggerated, a little hypnotic. This is when the ritual of remembrance begins. No horns are lifted, no proclamations are made. It's quieter than anything you've seen tonight, more like a shared breath than a ceremony. The chieftain stands, but not tall and commanding. He simply rises to his feet with the stiffness of someone who sat too long. His cup is half full. His eyes flicker with the reflection of flame. He says only this, to those who feasted here before us. And he drinks. One by one, the rest follow. Not in a rush, not in unison, just slowly, like waves returning to shore. Each person lifts their horn, murmurs something under their breath, maybe a name, maybe just a feeling, and drinks. Some close their eyes, some look toward the rafters, as if the beams themselves remember the faces no longer here. You do the same. You raise your drink, not entirely sure what to say, but something about this moment, the hush, the heat, the scent of smoke and stew, calls up a memory from your own life. A grandparent, perhaps, a lost friend, a name you hadn't thought of in years. You drink to that. This kind of shared remembering wasn't uncommon at Viking feasts. Scholars often describe it as a blending of hospitality and spiritual duty. Feasting wasn't just about living, it was about honoring those who'd made your life possible. And here, in the thick warmth of this longhouse, it feels natural, even necessary. Once the last cup is lowered, the chieftain speaks again. This hall holds memory. Let us not forget it. And with that, he sits. No applause, no commentary. Just the gentle return of conversation, like snow settling after a storm. A woman near the fire picks up a soft drum and taps it rhythmically. Slow, heartbeat-like. Not loud enough to call attention, just enough to underline the quiet. A few guests begin telling stories now, not for entertainment, but for reflection. These are real stories, memories, recollections, bits of family lore passed down through whispers and winters. One man shares how his uncle used to tame sheep by singing lullabies. Another recalls a time he fell into a frozen lake, only to be pulled out by his cousin, who then made him swear never to tell anyone because rescuing is for the gods, not the stupid. Laughter stirs, but it's gentle. You can feel the tone shifting from performance to connection. You realize this is where the feast becomes personal. Not everyone speaks. Some just listen, nod, or hum. One woman quietly carves something into a small piece of driftwood. A name, a rune, a memory. No one asks. And then, a surprise. A lullaby. An older guest, wrapped in layers of wool and fur, begins to hum. The song floats through the longhouse like smoke, barely louder than the fire. It's a tune meant for children, but everyone listens. The lyrics are soft in Old Norse, so you catch only fragments: night, sea, home, sleep. But the feeling is clear: rest, reassurance, return. Scholars have uncovered fragments of these old Viking lullabies, often filled with nature, protection, and the kind of practical magic that asks a wolf not to bite tonight, please. They weren't sappy, they were sturdy songs, built to keep fear away. The room listens, even the dogs seem to still. You lean your head back, letting the notes wash over you. It doesn't matter that you don't understand every word, the cadence alone is enough. It's here, in this half-dream state, that you notice a detail you missed before. Carvings along the beams above you, simple figures, a ship, a spiral, a man holding a bowl. They've been there all night, watching, remembering. Everything in this place remembers. You think about the path that led you here, across cold fjords, into the mouth of a blizzard, through a door you didn't know existed, and now you're sitting in a moment that feels as old as snow. Historians often argue over whether Viking memory practices were religious or familial. But really, does it matter? Whether you pray or just speak a name aloud, the result is the same. Someone is remembered. And right now, surrounded by these flickering faces and the soft hum of a lullaby, you feel remembered too. You aren't just a guest anymore. You're part of the feast. The lullaby trails off like smoke, vanishing into the beams and corners of the longhouse, and in its place comes the soft murmur of breath. Not conversation, just breath, a collective exhale. Everyone's bellies are full, the fire is low, and the last round of mead has gone from festive to medicinal. You too feel it, the weight of the night, the soft fog of drowsiness curling around your shoulders. But there's still one more custom before the feast begins to fade. It's time for gifting. In Viking culture, giving gifts wasn't just a matter of politeness or generosity. It was obligation, reputation, and ritual all in one. A good host gave gifts not to flaunt wealth, but to bind relationships. A good guest, meanwhile, received them with humility and the unspoken understanding that this kindness would, someday, circle back. Tonight, the chieftain stands again. No loud speech, no dramatic gesture, just a simple nod to a wooden chest near the hearth. From within, various items are lifted and carried out. A carved spoon, a woven belt, a little pouch of salt, a knife with a dull, well-loved edge. Nothing extravagant, nothing gilded, but everything useful, personal, thoughtful. He begins with his closest friends, handing each one a small item with a whispered word or two. No one boasts about what they've received. That would be vulgar. You simply take the gift, meet the chieftain's eyes, and nod once. A guest who told a particularly funny story gets a length of dyed wool. Another, who led the riddles with flair, receives a bracelet made from twisted brass wire. And then, to your surprise, the chieftain turns toward you. For a moment, you wonder if you've done something wrong. Did you offend the skald with your riddle? Were you supposed to laugh louder at the oar joke? But then, one of the older women steps forward and presses something into your hand. It's small, round, warm from her fingers, a carved wooden disc, smooth on one side, etched with a spiral on the other. A reminder, she says quietly, that you are here. No one claps, no one comments, but there's a soft tightening in your chest, like someone tied a string between your ribs and the rafters above. You close your fingers around the disc. Later, scholars would write extensively about Viking gift-giving practices, how they formed a kind of social glue, a woven net of favors and gratitude that kept communities intact, especially in times of famine, travel, or war. But none of that matters now. What matters is that this gift, this token, makes you feel seen. Named, even if your name was never spoken aloud, you'll carry it with you long after this night ends. More gifts are exchanged, some small and symbolic, a single bead, a feather, a rune-etched pebble. Others more practical, an extra cloak for a visiting cousin, a new scabbard for a warrior whose old one cracked during a particularly dramatic fall involving a slippery fish. Even the skald receives something, a flask of honeyed water and a sharpened quill. He grins, bowing his head, a reminder to keep my words sweet and sharp. There's an ease to it all, no hierarchy, no peacocking, just a soft, steady current of generosity running beneath the warmth of the night. Eventually, guests begin to rise, stretch, and drift toward their furs. Some curl up right there in the longhouse, beneath benches or beside the hearth. Others stumble outside, drawn toward the cold air like moths fleeing a too warm flame. You stay where you are, fingers still curled around your gift. Someone, maybe the same woman who carved the driftwood earlier, begins to hum again. Not a lullaby this time, just a gentle tune with no words, a melody meant to bridge sleep and memory. It loops once, twice, and then slips away. The fire pops softly. Embers glow like the eyes of quiet animals. The air is thick with sleep. You begin to understand something that no saga could explain. Vikings didn't just feast to eat or drink or laugh. They feasted to weave. Memory, obligation, joy, fear, longing, all wrapped together into one long thread of togetherness. And here you are, one stitch in that thread. Before your eyes close, you glance down at your little wooden disc again. You trace the spiral with your thumb. It's just a mark, a swirl of lines. But somehow, it feels like a map, leading not away, but back. Back to the fire, back to the warmth, back to the feast, and back, always, to the quiet truth of the night. You were here, and you were welcomed. By now, the longhouse has become a landscape of half-asleep shapes. A boot here, a hand there, a snoozing hound draped across someone's ankle. The meat is mostly gone, the fire is down to red glowing coals, and the heavy wooden doors creak slightly with every gust of wind outside. But even now, just when everything seems to settle into silence, one final tradition stirs. Not loud, not lively, just slow and strange. You notice it first by the shuffle of someone moving quietly toward the center of the hall, carrying a shallow bowl. It's filled with ashes, mixed with dried herbs. A soft, sweet scent trails behind them. Lavender, pine needles, dried moss. They begin sprinkling the mixture around the hearth. Not much, just a pinch at each corner. Then at the threshold. Then near the backs of sleeping guests. You watch, curiously. Another person follows behind them with a thin bundle of birch twigs, not to sweep, but to bless. Each sleeping form gets a gentle brush, a soft whisper, something halfway between a poem and a prayer. Sleep soft, sleep slow. The cold stays outside. Your bones remember home. It's mesmerizing. This is the closing rite of the Viking Feast, not performed every time, but often enough that those familiar with it close their eyes just a little more tightly when they hear it begin. It's called Kveldvila, the evening quieting, a mix of pagan lullaby and homegrown superstition. The belief was simple. Feasting opened the soul. Laughing, remembering, sharing. These thinned the veil between people and the unseen. So before sleep, you closed it again, gently. The birch twigs aren't symbolic of punishment or purification. They're a memory of the forest, a reminder that you came from somewhere wild and now you're inside, warm, safe, and wrapped in stories. As the brushing continues, you feel your breath sinking to the rhythm of it. In, out, in, out. The scent of herbs is stronger now. Smoke, sweetness, something slightly sharp like dried juniper. The person performing the rite, an older woman with silver hair braided so tight it looks sculpted, moves without speaking. Her eyes are half-lidded. She doesn't need to look where she's going. She's done this dozens of times. She brushes over the chieftain's boots, the scald's shoulder, even the snoring hound by the door. Then she approaches you. You don't move. You barely breathe. The birch brushes once across your shoulder, then your chest, then the space just above your head. It tickles slightly, but not enough to startle, just enough to mark the moment. She whispers, "Your feet are welcome. Your story is safe. Your rest is your offering." And then she moves on. You feel something loosen in your chest, a knot you didn't know was there, quietly untying. Historians rarely mention Kveldvila. It doesn't show up in official sagas or eddas, but fragments of it survive in Icelandic lullabies, rural rituals, even 19th century farmstead habits. A brushing, a whisper, a moment before dreams. It wasn't religious, or maybe it was. Either way, it was real. The rite finishes with a final pinch of ashes into the fire. They hiss quietly, sending a tiny puff of sweet smoke curling toward the beams. The woman bows her head, sets down the bowl, and settles into a corner, her eyes already closing. No one claps, no one speaks, but the room feels sealed, like a book whose last page has been gently closed. You adjust your position on the floor, curling slightly into the warm fur beneath you. The wooden disc still rests in your hand. The spiral presses into your palm. Around you, the longhouse breathes as one. Dozens of quiet inhales and exhales, a communal sleep, a temporary forgetting. And still, outside, the snow falls. The fjord waits. The cold stays where it belongs. In here, you are kept, not by walls, not by warriors, not by rules, but by ritual, by remembrance, by rest. You close your eyes. You are no longer a visitor. You are part of the quiet, and the quiet holds you like a cradle. You're not quite asleep yet, just drifting, held in that soft in-between space where thoughts blur into memory, and memory fades into something dreamlike. The fire has dropped to a dull glow. Occasionally, a coal shifts with a tiny crack, like the hearth whispering to itself in its sleep. But even now, the feast leaves one final echo behind, the after-stories. These aren't formal, no standing up, no performances, no dramatic tales of battle or prophecy. They're the kind of stories that slip out sideways, murmured between half-lidded eyes and heavy yawns. The kind of things people say only when their defenses are low and the mead has softened the edges of everything. You catch pieces of them, fragments floating through the smoky air like feathers. And then he walked 3 miles with the fish in his boot. She swears it was a troll, but I think it was just old Jorn again in his nightshirt. When the first ice came, the goats started screaming like they knew something. These aren't epics, they're oddities, little slices of remembered absurdity. Not quite true, not quite false, just shared. That's the point. You turn slightly on your fur mat, and beside you, a man with a long braid and a broken front tooth is telling someone a story in a low, gravelly voice. So I says to him, "You can't outrun the sea." And he says, "Maybe not, but I can outdrink it." And then he tried, for 2 days. Don't ask me how, but he lived. Never smelled right again, though. They both laugh, but it's quiet. Not belly laughter anymore. Just the kind that puffs a little more warmth into the air before fading. And you realize, these after-stories are the glue. They're the thing that lingers. While the feasting and the rituals are important, it's this, these soft, sleepy fragments that turn strangers into kin. Historians rarely capture this part. There are no chronicles of the part where someone confessed they once got stuck in a barrel for 3 hours during a wedding. No preserved runes recording the tale of the chicken who refused to die and lived in the wall. But they happened, over and over, for centuries. The after-stories are where the real bonding lived. Low-stakes honesty, shared oddities, the safety of laughter when it's almost too late to laugh at all. You think back on your own life, those strange moments that no one else would ever believe, the ones too small or too silly to share in daylight. Here, though, you could tell them, you'd be understood, or at least appreciated. Across the room, the skald murmurs to no one in particular. Did I ever tell you about the man who married a horse by accident? No one answers, but someone grunts encouragingly. He continues anyway. Apparently, it involved a festival, a lot of mead, and a misunderstanding involving costume masks and a very convincing neigh. You don't catch the end, doesn't matter. The rhythm of the story is more important than the punchline. And slowly, one by one, voices trail off. Someone snores softly. Someone else shuffles further under their fur cloak. The dog nearest the fire twitches in a dream, paws running in place towards some ghostly rabbit. You close your eyes again. The afterstories have done their work. They've tucked you in with laughter, sealed the night with absurdity, and reminded you, just before you slip under, that nothing bonds people faster than a ridiculous tale shared at the edge of sleep. In the morning, most of them will be forgotten. But the warmth, the safety, the strange memory of being in a place where it was okay to be odd, to be quiet, to be full, that will remain. You feel it settle in your chest like a small, steady flame. You belong here. The longhouse is nearly silent now, not the awkward silence of a forgotten conversation, but the deep, natural hush that only arrives when every possible word has been said, every bowl scraped clean, every story gently placed back on the shelf. This is the final stretch, the space where sleep takes over not with drama, but with quiet confidence. You're barely awake. You know it. Your body's curled inward, breath slow, one hand still resting on that little carved disc, like it's a secret someone gave you in a dream. Around you, soft shapes snore. Furs rise and fall with the tide of shared breath. The fire is now more memory than flame. An occasional crackle, a shifting coal, a faint orange heartbeat glowing beneath ash. You think you hear footsteps, but it's probably wind. You think you hear singing, but maybe that's just the way your mind hums when it finally rests. There's no one left performing, no more skalds, no more games. Even the seer is curled under a blanket that smells faintly of sea salt and juniper. And still, somehow, this is part of the feast, this waiting silence. It's not empty, it's saturated, with food, with story, with breath and bone and old wood, soaked in the laughter of decades. This is how Viking nights ended, not with goodbyes, not with cleaning up, but with being kept. And even now, the rules of the feast still hold. Even in sleep, there is a kind of order. Don't roll too far from your place, don't disturb the dog, and above all, remember. Remember that you were fed. Remember that your riddle made someone laugh. Remember that you were looked at and seen and gifted something simple and strange. Historians still argue whether Viking longhouse feasts were monthly, seasonal, or spontaneous. They debate how many people could realistically cram onto those benches, how often the seer was invited, whether the spiral on your disc means journey or return. None of that matters here. Here, you are no longer someone reading about the past. You are in it. You are part of the long, flickering tradition of people gathering under a roof to fight back the cold, not with swords, but with warmth, with shared food, shared jokes, shared breath. And somewhere, far off in your mind, you think of the first Viking who ever tossed a bone onto a fire, leaned back and thought, yes, this is the thing we do now. Not raiding, not ruling, just feasting, just remembering. That tradition lives in you now, just as much as it lived in the chieftain's sons or the woman who whispered blessings with birch twigs or the dog curled against your leg like you've always been there. You are not an outsider anymore. You're part of the quiet, and the quiet keeps you. Even now, as your thoughts begin to slip and swirl, you hold one image close, the low orange glow of the fire, dancing behind your eyelids like a secret signal just for you. Sleep has come. And the feast? The feast never really ends. Not here, not when you've been welcomed so well. Word count 190. Wind down begins below. Wind down 300 words. And now you let everything go. Let the warmth of the longhouse settle into your bones. Soft, steady, ancient. Let the smell of smoke and salt and wool drift away, like mist rolling back across the fjord. Let the hush of sleeping bodies, the creak of wooden beams, the faint hum of an old lullaby you never quite understood, cradle you gently toward dreams. There's no more need to think. You are safe, you are held, you are remembered. The spiral carved into your palm fades into the darkness, but the feeling stays, a quiet symbol of this place, this night, this belonging. You don't need to know what it meant. You don't need to remember every word of every story. You only need to know that, for a little while, you were somewhere warm, somewhere kind. The storm outside can keep blowing. The snow can keep falling. You're wrapped in something deeper than fur, deeper than ritual. You're wrapped in stillness, in memory, in the kind of sleep that comes when every part of you feels seen. So drift. Drift like the ash curling upward from a sleepy hearth. Drift like a boat sliding gently down a moonlit fjord. Drift like a story finding its last sentence and sighing it out. Sleep now. And when you wake, may you carry the calm with you, like a token, like a gift. End of script. Sweet dreams.